So one of the things we know from last week is that the White House was very neocon. Even when they weren't acting very neocon, it was usually because there were other things in the world keeping them from doing it, like the Iraq War wasn't going very well. They were still neocon, they just weren't able to act on it as well as they might have before. But they were still neocon, and when we think about neoconservatism, we have that liberal IR foreign policy behind it. So post-Iraq counterterrorism shift in emphasis. So before Iraq, really it is use of force to protect America. We're going to find terrorists, root them out, and destroy them. We're going to find state sponsors of terrorism. We're going to kill them, blow them up, do regime change, whatever that takes. It's very much a use the military to do this. So after Iraq, the United States doesn't have the same freedom of movement it did before. The fact that the United States could even sort of say, we're going into Iraq, and the rest of the world say no, and the U.S. does it anyways, and the U.S. still gets away with it, has a little less to do with power and a little more to do with the fact that the United States public was behind it. But after 9/11, after Iraq, the U.S. public is not really behind this as much anymore. So there's a change in the tone that you kind of saw in that, even in that video you just watched. One of the things is, if we're going to do counterterrorism, we can't just bomb the rest of the world into submission. So what is a good counterterrorism strategy for a neocon? The answer is, for the liberal, all the bad things in the world come from a lack of democracy. So democratization is going to be the best way to do counterterrorism. So it's not just that we're invading Iraq to get rid of their weapons of mass destruction, which we found out they probably didn't have a really solid program on that. But now it's more, if we make Iraq a democracy, then it's going to be less likely to be engaged in terrorism. So democratization itself becomes the strategy of counterterrorism. If there are more rights and more freedoms for the people, there's going to be fewer grievances. And if there's fewer grievances, there'll be fewer people who decide to blow things up. The other thing you're going to get, arguably, for the neocon, and honestly the liberal internationalists as well, is if you have a democracy, there's going to be more economic development. And more importantly, there's going to be more trade with the US, Europe, and that's going to make it too costly to do terrorism. Local governments then, when you have a democracy, the local governments will like what the United States is doing and will support U.S. counterterrorism efforts. And then the U.S. can then train the local police and the military, which means the U.S. doesn't have to have their troops over there. They just have to have trainers over there. And for example, the Iraqi military, the Iraqi police will take over, and they'll be the ones in charge of counterterrorism there. And the U.S. will have a smaller footprint in those places. So this becomes the idea here. Now, you can talk about this being talked about before 9/11 or before the war in Iraq, but honestly, the war in Iraq was weapons of mass destruction, and this only becomes the point of it after we find out they're not there. And so it doesn't even have to be, when we talk about democratization, it doesn't even have to be sort of we go in and we forcibly remove the head like Saddam Hussein and let democracy reign. It can also be the liberal internationalist version of this. And what we're going to find is even though Bush is a neocon and Obama is a liberal internationalist, they're both going to buy into this idea right here. Obama's counterterrorism policy is going to be largely a continuation of this. It's just that the methodology is going to be different. The U.S. is in charge. The international community is in charge. The second thing we're going to get after Iraq is a new emphasis on precision weaponry instead of military presence. So in Afghanistan, in Iraq, what we did is we flooded the field with U.S. military. Afghanistan's a little sketchy on that because it was more special ops, but if you looked up in the sky, there were a lot of planes, there was a lot of military support for the Afghanistan rebels. And then, of course, in Iraq, we were just all over the place. If you look around the Middle East, U.S. military is all over the place. So here's the idea, is instead of having U.S. military all over the place providing counterterrorism, we're going to turn to precision weaponry. So we're still going to need people on the ground to know where to strike. But once we know where to strike, we have weapons that will hit what we're aiming at. And so it's going to be a shift from having, say, 50,000 to 100,000 troops in the country to using drones, to using strike teams in and out. Intel is going to be more important than having people on the ground. And then satellites. We're going to, if there's one thing the United States has, it's not a lot of people that we are willing to get killed in counterterrorism operations. We have a lot of tech. And so we're going to rely more heavily on tech. There's a bonus that comes with this as well, is it minimizes civilian casualties. If we have precision strikes, we're not blowing up a whole city block, we're just blowing up that dude. You don't have military presence in an area. I mean, like sweeping through cities or things like that. It's going to minimize civilian casualties and will also ideally maximize the terrorist network disruption. That's the idea. That's going to be sort of the post-Iraq, the second term of W's presidency. And I don't think it's going to be a big surprise that Obama's going to like this. Just not the way that the neocons would want to do it, but still they'd want democratization. And Obama's going to like this. What about Trump? Trump's definitely going to like this. Is Trump going to like this one up here? The democratization is counterterrorism? It depends what day you catch him. But for the most part, probably not. All right, so that's that. Like I said, sorry it went long today. We're going to keep Wednesday a little bit shorter, and we'll pick up with Obama at that point. We'll see you then.